and welcome to everybody. Welcome to everybody for our annual festive webinar. So this time we're going to be looking at meeting autistic sensory needs during the festive period. And welcome to anybody who is watching this recording later on at all. All right. So whenever we do webinars, we do like to just kind of let you know who we are here at AUScot and why you should be listening to us, give you a little introduction. So for anybody who doesn't know, I am Felicity, otherwise known as Flick Goodhall. I'm the senior autism practitioner here at Autism Understanding Scotland. I'm a former English tutor where I didn't know I was autistic back then, but I did advertise myself as kind of specializing in supporting people, basically neurodivergent people. Didn't necessarily use that language back then because I didn't know it, but yeah, because I felt that strong connection with people. So even way back then, I kind of felt that connection instinctively. I was also one of the co-chairs on the Aberdeenshire Autism Strategy Planning Group, so very exciting that that's all kind of finished now and the actual strategy is being rolled out. They did really try to engage with autistic voices in the local community, which was really nice to see. And I'm also, as well as being late diagnosed autistic myself, I got my formal diagnosis couple of years back now, about 2.5 years back now, though I kind of realized, well, didn't realize, had it pointed out to me maybe, that I was autistic a good few years before that as well. But I'm also the parent of autistic children too. So Anne, are you good to introduce yourself quickly? And we'll be popping off to man the chat after this point.
Or as I like to call it, Anning the chat box. Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Anne Brown. I am the autism practitioner at AUScot. In a previous life, then I was a learning support worker, which on the Scottish mainland is known as a pupil support assistant. So I worked in schools for many years. I've also done a lot of social care work as well. And I've got a person-centred counselling qualification. Now, I got my formal diagnosis 4.5 years ago now, but I realised that I was autistic at the age of 27. So that's shockingly nearly 20 years ago. And I'm also the parent of an autistic child as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Anne. But yes, said autistic child is may well be floating around in the background, so Anne will now be disappearing off to Anne the chat. I do like that. And you're stuck with me for the duration of the presentation. I hope that's all right with you all. Okay, so we always like to go through what to expect today, because yeah, we think that it's important that we set that out in advance, and we'll have a little summary at the end as well. You can tell that all the staff at AUScot have kind of teaching backgrounds. So today we should gain a basic understanding of autistic sensory processing, just in general, and then have a bit of an exploration of what sensory differences the festive period specifically can bring, but also gain some strategies to support autistic people, autistic families, with those sensory differences over the festive season, and plenty of opportunity at the end after we stop recording to ask questions as well. Right onto it. So sensory experiences. What are these mystical sensory differences that autistic people actually have? Now, being autistic means having a brain that is structured physically differently to the kind of majority of the population. And one of the things that means is that we process sensory input in a very different way, typically to other people. So sometimes we're more responsive to certain sensory input. Sometimes we're less responsive to certain sensory input than other people generally would be. And we particularly tend to struggle with multiple layers of input because our brains don't tend to filter out sensory information. So other people, their brains do this really handy thing. I sometimes think of it as a bit like a kind of mixer table, you know, where you can slide the sort of dials up and down for various, you know, sounds normally, but you can use this sort of to represent any sensory input. And most people's brains, when they're in an environment, will kind of slide down all the sensory input that isn't important. Our brains don't tend to do that. Our sliders are kind of set to up all of the time, a lot of the time. So we're not filtering out that input. We're getting it all at one go, which is why we might struggle in very busy places, very noisy places where there's lots of layers of noise, you know, a busy cafe or something where you can hear the bell dinging over the door every time somebody comes in, the coffee machine behind the counter, the till going, people chatting all around, chairs scraping, you know, cutlery clinking, music playing, the toilet flushing down the corridor, all of these noises. We're constantly processing all of that. Our brains are not going, oh, none of that's important, just going to focus on what my friend next to me is saying. We're getting it all, which might mean that we struggle to even hear what the friend next to us is saying because we're so busy processing all the other input as well. And you can kind of extrapolate that out to all the senses. So, you know, visually in a busy cafe, you might also have the light reflecting off of the laminated menu and, you know, lots of pictures on the walls, and you're maybe spotting that one of them's a bit squint and that, you know, the tiles on the ceiling, one of them's the wrong way around. And we're seeing all the stuff that people have on all the tables and the textures of the chairs and all the different people's fabric that they're wearing and everything. And we're maybe smelling the coffee and what that person over there is eating for their lunch and the cake that that person is eating and the perfume from somebody else. And, you know, so all of this sensory input all of the time, we don't tend to be filtering it in the same way. But sometimes we will be, it doesn't mean that we're always sensory avoidant, that we, you know, we don't like all sensory input, because actually sometimes we can be sensory seeking with certain senses as well. We need more input, and we'll be seeking out certain input, and some input can be brilliant and amazing and lovely for us and cause sensory bliss as well. And those tolerances, what we need more of, what we need less of, that can very much vary. It can vary day to day, week to week, year to year, can be influenced by things like hormonal changes, can be influenced by things like how much sleep we've had, how much other sensory input we've had throughout the last day, week, however long, how well we're being supported. All sorts of things can kind of affect our sensory profile. And setting up a sensory profile and sensory diet can be really useful for autistic people. I mean, generally for anyone, to be honest, it might be a good idea to have a think about sensory needs, but especially for autistic people. And we've got another slide that kind of looks at that in a little bit more detail in a minute, so I won't go into too much detail right now, but supports can definitely help with inclusion, with allowing us to access all the same stuff as everybody else. Now, you might have spotted over on the right-hand side of this slide here that we've got all the senses, and we don't just have the 5 that you get taught in school, because actually we have more than 5 senses. So yeah, you've got your smell, you've got your vision, you've got your touch and taste and hearing, all those ones that you get taught at school. But we've also got vestibular, proprioception, and interoception. Now, because those ones are not quite so known about, we will go into a little bit more detail with those. So what's your vestibular sense? Essentially, it's your sense of balance, basically. It's all to do with how you are sort of moving through space, kind of keeping upright, and all that kind of inner ear and everything, how you're balancing as you go about your day. Now, if you've got highly responsive vestibular sense, then you might have difficulties when you're in a lift, you know, when the lift kind of goes up and settles on a floor, you might be needing to grab the rail or kind of being thrown off balance. You might seem a bit clumsy and uncoordinated, and I'll very much hold my hands up to that. There's a high chance at some point tonight that I'll suddenly go, oh no, oh, I just dropped the fidget I was using, because yeah, often kind of ping them around the room because I'm a bit clumsy like that. And yeah, I'm the sort of person who's often kind of covered in bruises and can't quite remember where they actually came from. But if you're less responsive with your vestibular sense, you might need more input. So you might need more kind of movement. That might be spinning. I needed a lot of vestibular input when I was younger. I would be the kid who I loved swings, absolutely loved my swing. So the swinging motion, but also what I really loved doing was kind of going round and round and round, twisting up the chains of the swing and then letting go and sort of leaning back so that I would spin around really, 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 really quickly with my head kind of sticking out. Which, to be honest, these days doesn't sound like much fun to me, because my sensory needs have changed, because that happens. But yeah, I loved spinning when I was a child. Now, again, day to day, you might have both or a combination of these. So it's not always a kind of either or situation that's going on there. So that's your vestibular sense. What's your proprioception? Stupidly long word. And sometimes when you first hear about it, it can seem like a bit of a weird one. Sometimes it doesn't always feel like it makes sense. So I'll do my best explaining it. So your proprioceptive sense is your sense of where you are in relation to the wider world, where your body ends and the rest of the world starts, where you are in relation to other objects. So, you know, sometimes you can kind of test your proprioception a little bit by closing your eyes and then trying to touch your nose without looking. And oh, okay, I was actually trying to touch my nose with my middle finger, so I missed. So it looked very much like I managed. So yeah, some people will be way up here, down here. Some people will get it bang on every time. It will vary, but that's linked into your proprioceptive sense. Again, along with the vestibular and proprioceptive senses are kind of quite closely linked. So this one is another one that's related to that kind of clumsiness, bumping into objects and things. Now, when I go around my house, it is set out in much the same way as it has been for the last couple of years. You know, my bed in the same place as it has been for a good couple of years now. And yet, on an almost daily basis, I walk into the corner of it. And I swear, when I walk through doorways, the door frame jumps out at me. I walk past tables and the corner juts out at me. Door handles grab my pockets and my sleeves and things as I walk past. So my proprioception is clearly not the best, actually. I'm not always very aware of where I am in the world compared to other things, other objects, you know, sort of related to that kind of spatial awareness as well. So yeah, that's your proprioception, and getting good proprioceptive input can really help us with emotional regulation. Getting any good sensory input that we like, very key in terms of staying regulated, both from a sensory point of view and an emotional point of view, because our sensory processing and emotional processing are really closely bound. But in particular, kind of getting good pulling, pushing motions, sort of stretching and things, that can be so good for keeping your emotional regulation. So pushing against stuff, you know, if you're so inclined, doing actual push-ups and things, but even sort of just pressing against a wall and leaning in and then pushing away from it again, pedaling, you know, if you want to be going out on bike rides, great. For people like me who are not quite so inclined to actually go out in the weather and using a bike, you can get little sets of pedals that sit under your desk that you can use as well, which I've got under my desk at the moment. Really nice, good stretchy things too. So, you know, something that you can kind of hold out in front of you and stretch and pull. Things like this can be super helpful when it comes to that emotional regulation. Very key at this time of year, when we often start to get emotionally dysregulated for a whole host of reasons that we'll be looking at in a minute. So what's that last sense? Okay, we've done the main five, we've done the vestibular and proprioception, still got your interoception, which is an enormous sense. Really big and important one for a lot of autistic people. So that's all to do with those internal body signals that we get. Things like pain, which for autistic people can be very different to the wider population. I've known autistic kids where, you know, the first thing parents have realized that, you know, the first time they've realized that there's an ear infection is when fluid starts pouring out of the ear. Take the kid to the doctor, and the doctor says, but surely they were screaming in pain before that. no, no, they weren't. No, they didn't realize they were in any pain whatsoever. So yeah, we don't always process that pain the same way. We might not notice that we're particularly in pain, or we might find that some pain we feel much more intensely. And sometimes within the same person, you might find certain kinds of pain, you barely really notice it at all. Other kinds of pain, you're screaming on the floor and everyone thinks you're a big old drama queen or something. But no, genuinely, we are processing that input very differently to other people. It's important to know that, because, if you're going to the doctor or something and they're asking screening questions, do you have a sore throat? Do you have any pain in your ears and things, can be very useful to know that what you're experiencing might not be the same as what somebody else is. We also have differences with how we experience hunger and thirst. Might not notice that we're hungry or thirsty. Might not notice that we're hungry until we just feel incredibly angry with the world, and like everybody hates us and we hate everybody and everything's going wrong, and why do I feel like this? And then someone says, yeah, had a sandwich recently. You go and eat something and you're like, oh, was just hangry, the world's not ending, there we go. Or you might kind of actually get to the point where you're feeling ill from hunger, and that's the first time you're recognizing that you are even hungry. But the flip side is, some autistic people constantly needing to snack and get that input and never really process when they're full instead. It can kind of go either way. Sometimes we don't recognize when we need the toilet. And so, yeah, when we do suddenly get that signal, it's like, well, everybody get out the way because I'm running. Or we might be the kind of people who's like, I'm just gonna nip to the loo just now before we leave. And oh, well, we took about 5 minutes longer to leave than I was expecting. Well, I'll just nip again before we go, just in case. And then when we get there, I'll go again. And then, before we have food, I'll go again. And then after we have food, So again, it can kind of go either way. Same with sexual desire as well. You can often kind of end up at one of two extremes. Temperature changes too. I'm the kind of person, I have a very narrow temperature band at which I feel comfortable, and out with that I start to get really quite grumpy. And we might not recognize when we're ill, because again, if we're processing those signals very differently, we might not really realize. Some autistic people just get a sort of impending sense of doom when they're ill, and that's it. And someone else will go, well, what's actually wrong? And you're like, like, is it sore? Do you feel queasy? What's actually going on here? What is it that you're feeling? And you're just like, I can't explain. I just feel wrong. I just don't feel right. So if you or loved ones have ever experienced that is actually quite common when you are autistic to be getting that. So yeah, those are those three extra senses, if you like, and what they actually are. So why do we process these things very differently? What's going on? Well, it is all linked to those brain differences that we have. And this kind of brain scan image illustrates that really, really well. Now, the autistic brain scan here is not going to be the same for all autistic people, because we vary considerably from the sort of the norm, the typical, but we also vary from each other a lot. So autistic brains are often very, very unique, each one, but this does show how much we can vary from that kind of norm, that baseline. So you've got a non-autistic brain there over on the left, and the sort of bluey turquoisey color is showing which parts of the brain were processing what was actually heard, and the pinky color was showing which parts of the brain were processing what was actually seen. Now you can see in the non-autistic brain, those areas are a relatively similar kind of size, and it's not taking up a massive, massive section of the brain. But in that autistic brain, is a huge, huge difference. There's a huge difference between the heard and the seen, and there's a huge difference from the non-autistic brain, right? So this autistic individual obviously really, really processes what they are seeing around them to an extremely high degree, and a huge amount of their brain is dedicated to processing what they're seeing around them. Much, much less of it processing what's heard. But yeah, they're processing an awful lot, and we do know from that this autistic individual is very good at pattern recognition, very interested in certain kind of patterns and visual representations, and their job really does rely on that an awful lot. So it makes sense that this is the case. But you might find another autistic person where those two will be switched, that it will be a massive area of the brain that's processing what's heard. And, you know, that might be the kind of autistic person who's saying to you, I can hear the electricity humming in the wall. If someone says that to you, they're not imagining it. Genuinely, some of us can actually hear the electricity buzzing in the walls. That really is true. So yeah, that kind of gives you a visual representation of what might be going on there. So we genuinely are processing these things very differently. What's happening in the brain is very different. We're not imagining it. I would say it's not in your head, but as you can see, it literally actually is in your head, but it is really happening. It is a physical thing that's happening there. Okay. Another thing when it comes to sensory stuff that's really super important to talk about is stimming. So what is stimming? What is that? Well, it's short for self-stimulatory behavior. Again, a bit of a kind of clunky sounding phrase, really, hence why it gets shortened to stimming. And basically it's any repetitive stimulation of a sense, and that can be any senses. So, you know, you've got the real kind of cliched stereotype stims, you know, like flapping. Lots of people know about autistic people and flapping, or rocking and things like that. But there's so much more to it than that. So why do we stim? What are the functions of stimming? First of all, it's important to point out that everybody stims, all right? It's a human behavior. It's not just an autistic thing, all right? But autistic people do tend to do it more. We do tend to do it to kind of greater extremes and maybe a bit more obviously, and we do seem to get a lot more benefit from it. Okay, but you might have seen non-autistic people maybe jiggling their leg a little bit. You might have heard them whistling to themselves. You might have seen them fiddling with their jewelry or clicking a pen in a meeting or something like that. That is all stimming. So it's not just us. It's not just autistic people who stim, but we do tend to do it more, and we maybe do it a little bit more obviously, maybe can't sort of control and suppress it quite as much, although if you're masking heavily you might actually. And yeah, we get these brilliant benefits here on the left. So why do we stim? What do we get out of it? It really helps us to focus. Okay, so right now I totally I kept the one that I showed you there as the stretchy noodle fidget, and I'm still stimming away with that whilst I am talking, and I've got a couple of different fidgets on my desk there because they allow me doing that, carrying on stimming whilst I'm talking, whilst I'm presenting, really helps to keep me focused. It also really aids with remembering information. So if somebody is talking to you and you are stimming, you're more likely to be taking in what it is that they're telling you and filing it away in your brain, actually remembering it. But it also allows you to recall stuff that you've previously remembered, you know, sort of taken in and processed as well, much more easily. You're more likely to be able to kind of come up with an answer for someone without doing the whole like, oh, hang on, let me think. It'll help an awful lot with actually recalling that information. Super helpful for sensory regulation. If you're getting distressing sensory input, your sensory needs are not quite being met in the environment you're in, but you're able to stim, you're much better able to stay in that environment and keep regulated even though you're getting that distressing input. And because the sensory regulation and emotional regulation are so closely bound up, helps us with our emotional regulation as well. We are less likely to get really dysregulated, to end up, you know, hitting a crisis point, having a meltdown or something if you are stimming. It can be a form of self-soothing as well, kind of linked into that emotional regulation. So if we are feeling rubbish for whatever reason and we're stimming, that can help to soothe us. It can also be a way to communicate as well. I get some really exciting news and I might flap and jump up and down. That's communicating to people that I'm super excited, you know. Might kind of flap as well with some excitement. But if I start sort of pacing and flapping and rocking, my husband knows there's something wrong. What's happened? What's going on? You all right? You know, because again, that's sort of communicating that something has gone wrong. So different stims might be good ways of communicating to other people how we're kind of feeling. So and this will vary for each individual autistic person, so you kind of need to get to know their actual stims and maybe have a talk to them about how they might show certain emotions through different stims. But it's also just really good fun. I suppressed my stims for many years. I didn't know I was doing it. It was totally subconscious. But yeah, after I had it pointed out to me when I was at a rainbow meetup once, when I was just about 4 years old, that me kind of tapping my fingers in front of me and then swinging them behind me and tapping them behind my back and kind of doing that over and over again, that was weird. And asked, what are you doing? The shame I felt with that, discovering that I was doing something weird, that it was making me stand out as different, that other people might be looking and judging me, that was quite intense. And I did start to analyze myself and my own movements and behaviors a lot after that. And I really do think that was one of the catalysts for me suppressing a lot of my stims throughout my life. And then when I discovered I was autistic, I believed for a while that I didn't stim. No, I don't do that actually. And then I started to realize that, oh, when I'm in a busy environment out and about, I bunch up my toes in my shoes and then release them, and then bunch them up again and then release them and bunch them up and release them. That's a kind of stimming, but no one can see it because it's in my shoes. I fiddle with my jewelry because that's a more socially acceptable stim that non-autistic people even do. I would maybe like sort of cross my arms and press my nails into my arm and then run my finger over the indents, but in such a way that people couldn't see that I was doing that. So I was stimming. I also used to sing to myself constantly the same song over and over and over and over and over again as well. So I did actually have quite a number of stims. I just didn't realize that they were stims, and often I was hiding them from other people, which meant I ended up hiding them from myself. So on that note, what kinds of stims are there? What sorts of things actually count as stimming? Because, you know, they're not all those movement-based ones that people automatically think of when you mention stimming. So some of the examples of auditory stimming, for instance, would be humming to yourself, you know, whistling, maybe tapping, you know, like you like to sort of drum your fingers on a table or something. That's singing, which is still one that I do to this day, especially if I have a same song that I like, that I'm really into at the moment. I'll learn all the lyrics and then I will just sing it over and over and over and over. My poor children. And yeah, that's a really satisfying stim for me. Echolalia. So echolalia is where you hear something that somebody else has said and you repeat it, or even palilalia as well, which is when we repeat something that we have said ourselves. So yeah, these are some of the sort of auditory ones that you get. You get kind of tactile stimming, so that's sort of touch based, so kind of like biting your nails can be one, maybe rubbing skin, doing kind of hair twirling, feeling different textures and things, so really liking to feel all the different things out there. You've got certain visual stims too, so like watching things spinning. So you might have seen back on the slide that mentioned stimming, it had one of those little kind of windmill pinwheel things, whatever you want to call it, where you know you blow on them and they go round and round and round, spin round, that sort of thing. Watching fairy lights, you know, this kind of time of year as well. Maybe blinking, you know, if you or an autistic person, you know, you sort of feel like they go through phases of blinking a lot, or sort of blinking in weird patterns, and that can be a kind of stim actually. Maybe watching raindrops kind of running down the window, doing that raindrop racing thing where you kind of pick a couple of raindrops and you see which one wins, which one gets down fastest. Watching the waves, you know, at the beach, all these kind of good things, lava lamps and the like as well, they're always good. So visual stims. You've got sort of smell and taste ones, so olfactory and taste, things like sort of sniffing stuff. You know, some autistic people will constantly kind of sniff anything that they pick up. Maybe licking things as well to kind of to try it out. I know a little autistic boy who used to like licking walls and things like that. Liking to chew, you know, constantly kind of liking, I don't know, to have sort of crisps or chewing gum or things like this. Smelling, oh, you know, that baby smell, smelling babies' heads, and you know, so anything where you're kind of eating or you're smelling things as that good for that good sensory input, that can be a form of stimming as well. You've got your vestibular and proprioceptive stimming, so jumping and bouncing and things. Yeah, I've seen autistic kids who will just for hours at a time just kind of bounce, 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 and some adults as well. I mean, and it's something that I do sometimes too, possibly to a slightly lesser extent, but yeah, like kind of bouncy stimming can be really, really fun. Spinning, like I said earlier, yeah, to get that really good vestibular input. Flapping as well, that's why the kind of autistic flapping is a bit of a stereotype. That's getting that good input as well. Jogging, some autistic people they need to go for a run every morning to feel regulated. That's because they're getting really good proprioceptive input with the sort of pushing against the ground with the running. Not for me, you know, personally, but that's fine. You know, different things work for different people. So yeah, that's great if it works for you. Cycling as well is another one. But yeah, rocking, pacing as well, you know, maybe sort of constantly walking round and round or up and down. All of those can be stimming. But you've also sometimes got kind of almost like internal ones, which again can happen sometimes when you maybe repress those stims, maybe when you've been told an awful lot to sit still and focus. But we still have that urge, we're still needing to regulate, we're still needing to stim. So sometimes it even goes like right into our mind. So we might count in our minds. You might be the kind of person who counts each step as you're walking along, or you just sort of count up to a certain number and then start again. Maybe reciting a poem or words to a song or something in your head. Might be visualizing words. I know some people who kind of see words as they say them, as well, or you know, kind of make patterns out of words in their mind. They might have that kind of internal echolalia going on as well, where they hear a word and they're sort of repeating it to themselves, but not out loud, not using mouth speak. It's all kind of in their brain, repeating it again and again and again. So yeah, that as well can even be a sort of form of stimming. Okay, so what can help here? I said earlier that we would be having a little look at the sensory profile because I think that's really, really helpful. Now, we would always say that ideally, in an ideal world, you would go and get a referral to an occupational therapist to do a sensory assessment for you. And it's certainly something you can go and ask your GP if you can be referred for. But you might not be able to access one depending on where you live, depending on other factors. It might be that you're told no, that's not something that we have here, or there might be an extremely long waiting list. So at that point, what you can do is we actually have one on our website that was created by an occupational therapist and autistic adult, and you can go and fill it in yourself. We've got another downloadable doc in there, which is guidance notes on how to fill it in, and one too that is an example copy that's already been filled in, which makes it that little bit easier, because I know that I always like to have an example to follow when I'm filling something in for the first time. So we thought that would be quite helpful. So when you get these slides out as a PDF, you'll be able to click on that link there and it will take you to the downloadable document section, all free to download and print off. And you can actually do a sensory profile yourself if you like. So when you're doing a sensory profile, when you're sort of thinking about that sensory diet, what you really need, you're thinking about what sensory input you like, what sensory input you dislike. You know, for me specifically, one of the worst kinds of sensory input I can get is hearing somebody sweeping concrete. Really, just that noise, it's horrible. It sends like actual goosebumps up my back. It makes me feel really, really awful. Luckily, not something you come across very much in day-to-day life. But if you're sort of thinking, oh, wow, yeah, actually really hate that kind of sensory input, no wonder I'm struggling in environments that have that in it, that can really help, because then you can sort of think about whether you can start to avoid those environments a bit more, if that is sensory input that can be changed or removed, or whether at the very least, if it's something that you just absolutely have to attend and you don't have very much choice in the matter and you can't do anything about the sensory input, maybe a dentist appointment or something, then can you at least get some good sensory input along with it? Can you be stimming as well, you know, to help? So yeah, thinking about what's soothing for you, what sensory input's really soothing. Do you love stroking really soft fluffy blankets or plushy toys, you know? Do you get really soothed by listening to a certain song on headphones? Do you get really soothed by having deep pressure from a weighted blanket or a weighted lap pad or something like that? So thinking about that, thinking about what it is you find triggering, you know, maybe loud, sudden noises. It might be really bright light is very triggering for you. So thinking about that as well. But also thinking even about things, you know, what sensory input invigorates me, makes me feel ready to get up and go of a morning, you know, all this kind of stuff. So really deep diving into that. And then a big part of helping yourself and your sensory needs is actually accepting that you do have sensory differences in the first place. It did take me a little while when I sort of realized or had it told to me that I was autistic. I was kind of like, well, I guess I've got a couple of sensory differences, slightly restricted eating maybe, and sometimes I struggle when there's lots and lots of noise, you know, lots of different kinds of noise all at once. But for the most part, nah, I don't really have that. And then as I started to learn and learn more, I realized that, yeah, I have a significantly different sensory profile from the general population. And that's okay, actually. That really is. And working with those differences has made such a big difference to me, and been really, really positive compared to before when I didn't realize and I wasn't putting any kind of sensory supports in place for myself. It's important that you do try to request those changes as required. Now, legally, as autistic people, we do have sort of protection under certain UK legislation, things like the Equality Act 2010, for kids, the UNCRC, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, but also the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities for any autistic people of any age. So we are entitled to things like reasonable adjustments in order to access education, employment, healthcare, you know, the wider society, things like this. And it is important as well that we remember your sensory profile might well change day to day because of tiredness and other factors, but also over your lifetime due to those kind of big hormonal changes and things like that. So it's not set in stone. It can be quite a good idea to revisit that sensory profile every now and then, just to check that you are still getting all the right input and you don't need to make some adjustments there. Okay, so that's sort of thinking about your sensory needs in a very general sense. Now we're going to be looking at more specifically at this kind of time of year, this sort of festive period that we're going into, that we're kind of already in, right? Because it lasts for such a long time. What extra sensory differences does that actually bring? fairy lights. There are lights everywhere, and maybe you love them, maybe they give you a headache, maybe you love certain colors and others are a big no. Maybe it's when they're flashing particularly that you really struggle. But there are lights everywhere around this time of year, right? Loads of different kinds of sort of decorations and lights and things. So that for some people can be quite difficult. There are also colorful decorations of all kinds, and they're often sort of shiny as well, reflective too. So yeah, you've got kind of all that sort of busyness going on visually at this sort of time of year, and it can be a bit overwhelming for some of us. And it'll be in homes, but it's also often in offices, in supermarkets, in all kinds of places. So yeah, you'll find that you've got this kind of wherever you go at this time of year. And then you might also find that there's music playing everywhere you go. Again, you go to the supermarket and you've got kind of festive tunes playing and things. Places that maybe don't normally play music, like maybe the office or whatever, suddenly they're blasting kind of Christmas tunes at you or something. So yeah, again, you've got kind of a lot more extra music. You've got people singing, maybe people turning up at your door, carolers or the like, kind of singing. So yeah, lots of music going on as well. Now, again, partly why I wore my Christmas jumper for this one. Often got different clothes we're expected to wear at this time of year, right? Whether it is like, oh, it's festive Fridays, so you come in your your Santa hats, or wear your festive jumpers, which might be woolly and kind of itchy. Might be that, oh, you're going to the office party, but you have to, you're expected to kind of dress up for it, and my party clothes are not ones that I normally wear, and they sort of pinch me here, and they're a bit scratchy there, and it's not quite comfortable for me. So quite often we're wearing different sorts of clothes. It might even just be that the different clothes are having to bundle up for the cold weather. So you're wearing hats and scarves and gloves, and that might be tricky, or big heavy jackets as well. And if you don't normally like to have a jacket, that can be difficult. And all the layers too can be quite tricky for some of us too. I always struggle with things kind of bunching up under my armpit, which is why I don't wear a coat or a jacket. I'm the weirdo in my local village who goes around in a cloak. Wear a cloak instead. So there we go. Yeah, you hear about that strange kind of witchy woman in the northeast of Scotland who goes around in a long cloak. It's probably me. But yeah, it's because of my sensory needs and those sensory differences at this sort of time of year. We also often have different food around now as well. Both in the supermarket, they have a whole different range of food, and to fit that in, they might have taken away some of your normal safe food for a while, which is just really distressing. But also going to sort of parties and things, there might be different food to what you're used to. On certain celebration days, you might be expected to eat a different dinner to what you're used to eating, things like that. So that can be difficult if you've got those sensory differences, or if you've normally just got your sort of same food or your safe food that you eat all the time. Being expected to participate in all these different meals and things can be quite difficult. It's also different scents everywhere. There's often lots of kind of cinnamon around. I love cinnamon. Not everybody does though, and if I didn't, I can imagine this time of year might be a bit tricky for me. Lots of kind of spices and things. But yeah, also maybe like new perfumes. People are getting presents, so they're maybe getting a lot of new scented stuff and perfumes and the like. So you might suddenly, even in your own household, have your family members smelling different to how they normally do, But even the smell of the decorations, like tinsel has a specific smell, right? And because they sort of sit away in the attic in boxes a lot of the year, often it's a kind of dusty smell. For some people, that's got brilliant associations and they love it. Some of us don't, though. It can be difficult. And the smell of like Christmas trees as well. Again, some people love it, some people don't. So you've got that kind of difference, that change as well. Often there's a lot of kind of touch involved at this time of year. Might be that there's you're going to various dances and parties where people are kind of expecting you to dance with them, but also you might have sort of family members visiting and expecting lots of hugs, got mistletoe and stuff, and people are wanting you to kiss them, and so there's all of this, all of this going on, extra touch maybe expected of you at this time of year. Then there's changes to packaging as well. So not only is the food sometimes different in the shops, but even your normal food stays the same recipe, it's still there. It might look different. Why does my loaf of bread need a Santa hat on it suddenly at this time of year? Why do my normal crackers suddenly have snowflakes on them? So for some of us, that might be quite difficult to deal with as well, the fact that our normal stuff suddenly looks very different. And then you've got changes in the temperature and the weather and everything. So it's cold. I really struggle with the cold. I mean, don't get me wrong, struggle with the hot as well. Like I said, very narrow temperature range at which I'm comfortable. But yeah, real cold, and I'm miserable if I'm too cold. Really don't like being too cold at all. So that can be really tricky, getting into the car in the morning at this time of year, and it takes ages to heat up, even when you got your heating on full. All the way into the office today, I had it up at 30, never once turned it down, and I was only just getting warm by the time I got into the office after driving for like almost half an hour. So yeah, that can be really, really tricky. And all the weather changes as well, that can be quite difficult, because you've got snow and sleet and wind and rain and things like that. And even the fact that it's getting darker earlier as well, that can be a big change, and that can be tricky for us. And it stays dark for longer in the mornings, another big sensory change there. And then, if you're getting presents and things, sometimes wrapping paper, like it can be quite noisy, especially if people are ripping it. That can be noisy. The feel of it, sometimes can be tricky too. Sometimes some of it's quite reflective and shiny. So there's a lot going on there as well. And this is just some of them. You might be able to think of more specific examples for yourselves, for your families, for your kind of life. But yeah, this gives you an idea of some of those sensory changes that we get at this time of year, and why it might be particularly difficult for us to stay regulated. Because even if we love this stuff, it can still be actually quite dysregulating to have those big emotions, even if they are positive ones. And change and transitions can be tricky for us at the best of times. So there's a lot of other factors here as well. And I wanted to mention those because, as I said, your emotional regulation, your sensory processing, very, very closely linked. So that means that this other stuff that's happening, that will have an effect on your sensory profile and your sensory needs at this time of year, and what sorts of sensory input you might be seeking and avoiding, and how responsive you are to those. So what's some of the other stuff that we've got going on? We have to suddenly make a lot of decisions, which is a bit of a demand, right? So it might be, what do you want on your present list? Have you made a list yet? Have you made a list? What am I supposed to be getting you? I don't know. And suddenly your mind goes blank. Throughout the year, you might see hundreds of things. You're like, oh, that's lovely. I'd love that. Ooh, that's awesome. I'm going to remember that for, my birthday or for Christmas or whatever. But yeah, as soon as somebody actually asks you, oh, I always get very, very stressed. And then we're making decisions about if we're buying things for other people as well. So lots of decisions. Are you coming to the party, the office party or something? Are you doing XYZ? There's just an awful lot of decision making, and that can be very, very tricky. And a lot of changes to routine. Kids at school are being pulled out of class to rehearse for their nativity play. They normal lessons are cancelled for their like Christmas dance or whatever. In the office as well, you might be expected to kind of participate in the Secret Santa, so you come out of your normal work in order to do that. You've got parties and stuff going on. You've got sort of changes in terms of like the actual kind of time off that you might have, kind of annual leave and things. So a lot of your normal routine, a lot of the stuff that you normally do day to day, can be changed at this time of year, and that can be really, really tricky. And yeah, increased socializing as well. You might be expected to go and visit all the family, participate in all the different parties and get-togethers and things, go along to lots of events and stuff. And it's tiring, right? It's not that autistic people all hate socializing. Far from it. A lot of us really do love being around other people, you know, getting to chat to them and interact with them. But we can struggle when it's not on our terms. We can struggle if our sensory needs aren't being met. We can struggle if we're having to socialize a lot with non-autistic people because they've got a different communication style from us. So we might be having lots of misunderstandings and things like that. So it can be really, really draining having to socialize too much. There's also the anticipation as well. Like, oh, I'm so excited, you know. It's sort of known as a good emotion, right? But again, any extreme emotion can leave us very dysregulated. And because it's sort of built up for so long as well, it can be so drawn out, that feeling of anticipation. And actually, it can end up being a bit anticlimactic because you're waiting weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks for maybe a big day, and then it's over and done with really quickly, and you're left kind of a bit deflated, like, oh, it was this big build up and now it's done. Oh, right, okay, and that's it until next year. So that can be quite tricky to deal with as well, actually. And we can have anxiety about, you know, unknown presents as well. For some people, sort of not knowing what it is that they're going to be getting is really, really hard to deal with, actually, and can cause an awful lot of dysregulation. Sometimes the fact that we know people are going to be watching us when we're opening presents can be really anxiety inducing as well. Like, oh no, am I performing my gratitude in the right way? Do I look like I like the present enough? Am I smiling enough? You know, are they going to be annoyed with me if I open it up and I can't hide the fact that I don't like it? You know, so there's a lot of stress and pressure on you sometimes when you're opening things in front of other people as well, and that can be very, very difficult for some to deal with. Your normal places and amenities and stuff might be closed over this kind of period, you know. Maybe your local sort of swimming pool that you go to get some good proprioceptive sensory input constantly, maybe that's closed for 2 weeks, you know. What do you normally do? What do you do outside your normal routine? So yeah, like having your supermarkets closing for a couple of days, you know, when maybe you normally like to just pop in every day for like a couple of minutes so you're not in there for too long to pick up your milk and your bread or whatever. Like that sort of thing can be really difficult for us. Even things like new toys and new stuff that we're getting, like that's change, right? And for some people, just having all this new unknown stuff in your house can actually be difficult. And I know it sounds weird to some people, and some people might say, oh, that's just not being, you know, that's ingratitude. You're supposed to be grateful when people buy you presents. That's really rude. But we can't help it if we do end up getting distressed by having all this new stuff everywhere. And that can sometimes be quite stressful. People kind of getting a bit merry as well, maybe going to parties and things and getting in various ways, whether it's sort of getting very excitable, you know, whether it's that they're participating in certain things and they're getting very loud, and maybe acting a bit weird, and that can make some of us a bit uncomfortable to be around as well. So yeah, that sort of thing can be very hard to deal with as well. And it's everywhere. I mean, Christmas in particular, this time of year, there are lots of different holidays going on. You know, we didn't want to specifically pick out just Christmas, but let's face it, Christmas is the one that's really everywhere and shoved in your face and you cannot escape it. Yeah, you go to the supermarket and it is everywhere. You go down the street and there are lights and everything up, and it starts so early. Those Christmas adverts, that Christmas music, the aisle in the supermarket, all of this can start weeks or even months before the actual big day. So again, it's the fact that it's so all encompassing, so overwhelming. It's just absolutely everywhere. And if it is something that you find difficult, you just really can't escape it, which is so tricky. But having said all that, we don't like to just go, here are a bunch of problems you might be experiencing. Bye. we like to come up with solutions. We like to think of some tips and tricks and things that will help you support yourselves, help you support your loved ones through this kind of time of year. So we had a little think about some ways that you can help with a lot of this stuff. So hopefully over the next few slides, there'll be some things here that will be really useful information for you. And also previous years as well, we've had some really good suggestions from participants as well in the chat and the like. So when we're finished the recording as well, I'll see if other people have come up with some brilliant suggestions too. First of all, thinking about food during the holidays, because that can be quite a big one. It's really important to remember it's okay to eat non-traditional food during the holidays. You don't have to have turkey. You don't have to have Christmas pudding. You don't have to participate in any of these meals or snacks or foods or whatever it is that people are expecting you to. It's okay if you, for your Christmas dinner or whatever, have your normal plate of chicken nuggets and chips. That's fine. If that's what you're going to enjoy, and that's the main thing, isn't it? Is actually that you're getting enjoyment out of it. That is okay. It really, really is. If your kid is going to be going along to the family celebrations and you're kind of worried because, oh no, they're not going to want to eat granny's, meal that she spent hours cooking, and actually they're only going to want to sit and have their normal potato waffles or something. That's all right. That's okay if that's what they're going to eat and that's what they're going to enjoy and that's what they're going to feel safe having, and you're not going to have meltdowns, over food. It's fine. It really, really is. So yeah, it's genuinely okay. It's also okay if you decide that actually Christmas dinner or your main festive meal or whatever isn't going to happen on the day, because for a lot of autistic adults, it's difficult. That executive functioning that's required when you're trying to keep everyone happy, you're doing maybe some present opening and things, you've got activities planned, but then you're also having to cook this big meal with a lot of pressure kind of on that one meal being perfect and amazing, and then you're missing out on what the rest of the family or people are maybe doing at the same time. You can't kind of be present with them whilst you're having to slog away cooking a meal or whatever. So if it would work better for you and the people you're with to have your Christmas dinner on Christmas Eve, have your kind of main meal like the day after or whatever, that's all right. There's nothing wrong with that. There are no rules. No, police are not going to come around your house and go, "Hey, why are you eating that today? You're supposed to have it yesterday." Like, it's fine. It really, really is. If you sort of like, on the main day, we're just going to have some picky bits. We're just going to stick some stuff in the oven that's really easy and snack on that. That's all right. It's fine, honestly. And again, if you're going to someone else's house for a meal or a party or whatever it is, whether it's Christmas dinner or whether it's any other time, for anything else, it's all right for you to say to them, you know what, I have quite a specific diet, actually. I'm going to bring my own food along. Bring your own meal there. Bring your own snacks. That's all right. If they're worthwhile actually keeping in your life, they're going to understand. And if they don't, well, does it matter that much, actually? So yeah, it's fine to just take your own stuff along. If you want to offer it out to everybody else, that's cool. If not, if you have sort of needs around kind of contamination and things and you need to just have your own food, that is all right as well. Also might want to sort of have your festive meal in a separate room to everybody else. Maybe everybody else, maybe especially if it's a big family gathering or something, all being sat around the table, if that's too noisy for you and you can't focus on your food when you got everybody talking at you and asking questions and things, that's all right. If the smell of everybody else's food is going to put you off yours, you can go and eat it somewhere else. That's fine. Yeah, so we don't have to do these things the same way as everyone else. It's all right if we're different. It really is. It doesn't need to take away from the enjoyment of the day. All right. So yeah, you or a loved one can eat your meal through in the living room, up in your bedroom instead. That is all right. Also, when we're thinking about getting the food in, actually buying it, So supermarkets can be pretty overwhelming at the best of times, right? Supermarkets, oh, I think I've met one autistic person who loves supermarkets, loves going around. Shopping's their, a big special interest for them. They find it really exciting. The vast majority, and that's cool, brilliant, love that, good for them, genuinely. But for a lot of us, I would say the vast majority of autistic people, supermarkets are tricky places, shall we say, to be. They can be very, very overwhelming. There's an awful lot of sensory input going on. There's expectation of maybe small talk when you get to the till and things. It can be very, very tricky. And then when you're throwing in the fact that at this time of year, they're often busier, the layouts may be changed. They've got different packaging on the shelves, all this kind of stuff. There's decorations up, all this. It really can be very, very difficult. So try and think ahead, can you get a delivery slot instead so that you're getting your food delivered to you rather than actually having to go out? Can you pick a quiet time to go to the supermarket instead? Can you kind of have a buddy to go along with you so that you're not alone navigating the supermarket and you've got someone else to kind of keep you right, make sure that you're getting everything on your list, and who can maybe take over, pushing the trolley if you need to just go out and get some fresh air for a minute or something like that. So yeah, sort of thinking about planning that shopping that you need to do can really help. And maybe if packaging is going to be an issue for you or for like a family member, maybe a child or something, then think about maybe putting it into unmarked containers instead, so that they're not going to realize that the packaging looks different. So you can try out giving them food in a little ramekin or a little tub or a little bottle or something, instead of it actually being in the packaging and them sort of seeing all of those differences. So yeah, sort of thinking about ways around some of the issues that might crop up to do with food can be really helpful. There's also, because there's all that socializing and going out and events and outings and all that kind of stuff expected at this time of year, we've got a bunch of tips for that as well. So reducing the time that you're spending at these social events, that is all right. If you need to turn up a bit later than everyone else, leave earlier than other people, pop out halfway through for a while and come back, that's okay. All of that is all right. But also, you don't have to go to everything. You can just reduce the number of things you're going to, full stop. You don't need to go to every single gathering, every party, every meal, every event. It's all right. It's all right if you miss some of them. It really is. And actually, if it's going to be so overwhelming for you that you're going to end up miserable, isn't it better to go to fewer of them and actually get to enjoy yourself, So yeah, think about that. Think about actually reducing the number of these things you're going to, but also the time that you're spending at them. Make sure as well that you're scheduling in loads of downtime, plenty of breaks. Very overwhelming time of year, so don't be busy doing something every single day if that's going to leave you, burnt out, if that's going to lead to lots of crisis points. It's all right to have a day set aside, a few days set aside where you're doing nothing at all, where you can just immerse yourself in special interests, where you can rest and relax, where you can do the things that you need to do to stay regulated, to actually stay at your best, to be able to enjoy the other things. And it's fine if partway through you need to go and take a break. You need to take yourself off away to a different room for a while and read a book, listen to some music. If you need to go for a walk, get out in the fresh air, get away from everybody for a while, it's fine. It really is. It's okay. You don't need to be spending every single second with other people and in the middle of all of these events and parties and the like. It's fine to actually have a bit of distance at times and get that rest and get those breaks. Also, having conversations with people and kind of having those boundaries in place about no touching. And I'm not saying that for all autistic people. Some autistic people are really love all the kind of touching and hugging and things, and that's great if you do, and it's consensual obviously, and the other person does as well. Brilliant, great. But for some autistic people, they're not going to want all of the kind of touching. So it's okay to say, look, no touching. And you can tell people in advance as well, you know. See, when we all meet up later, I know that everybody's going to be hugging and kissing each other because we've not seen each other for a while, but I actually find that really difficult from a sensory point of view. So I'll just be giving everyone a high five instead. You know, I'm just going to be waving at everyone. It's not because I don't love you and care about you. I do an awful lot, but I will be able to have a much nicer time with you if I don't have to hug anyone. Not personal to you, you know, explaining these things, it's fine, you know, sort of telling granny that your kid, like, yeah, no, actually he doesn't do hugs, but he'll give you a lovely wave, you know, or something. That's all right. Yeah, you know, letting your uncle know, yeah, actually I need some more personal space. I need a bit of distance. I can't be really close up to people. I know that when I was in very busy family environments in previous years, I've often been the person who will offer to sit on the floor rather than on the sofa with everyone else. Before I knew I was autistic, sometimes family members would get a bit offended when we'd all be, you know, bunched up, everybody coming around for the holidays, maybe staying, and we're all watching a film of an evening, and everyone's kind of squeezing on the sofa, and it's like, it's all right, Flick, come on, there's space here, and I'd be like, no, I'm all right, I'm just gonna go sit on the floor over here. Oh, fine, you don't want to sit with us then? Oh, all right then. But yeah, it was too much for me. It was too much from a sensory perspective. I know that now. I realize why I used to do that. I was actually much more comfortable just going and sitting on the floor, having a bit of space from everybody else, and their, you know, their physical proximity and the way they smelled, and the little noises and shuffling that they were doing during the film and all of this kind of stuff. That was really difficult for me. So just going and sitting off to the side a bit on the floor, that suited me, and that's okay actually. Explaining your needs in advance, so like the, you know, explaining, oh, actually I won't be doing hugs, you know, this year or whatever, in advance. It's funny how many people are really understanding if you do explain. And the thing is, doing it in advance means you're not put on the spot, because if you wait until you're actually there in the environment and you're maybe dysregulated and you're maybe anxious, you know, and then you're suddenly put on the spot and you have to explain that you're going to be eating something different to everyone else, or you don't want to have hugs from them, or whatever it is, it might come out a bit more abruptly than you're meaning it to, you know. No, I don't like hugs, or something like that, and that's when people might be more likely to kind of get offended. So yeah, if you're wanting to avoid that, explaining these things in advance before the actual event can be really useful. And yeah, not everyone, totally appreciate that not everybody's understanding, but actually a lot of people really are, if you can explain it to them, you know, so that they're expecting it once you turn up. And in the same kind of vein, contacting places ahead of time, you know, whether it's Santa's grotto, whether it's, you know, a kind of like disco party, or whatever it is, kind of explaining to them in advance, contacting them and saying, look, is there a particularly quiet time that you tend to find every day that we could come? Is there any way that I could not have to queue, you know, somewhere else that I can maybe wait away from the busy queue for my turn, or so that you can allocate my child a specific time that we turn up and then we get straight in, rather than having to stand and queue for half an hour. Things like this. If you've got needs that you know about, then contacting the venue in advance to see what they can do to support those needs can be really helpful. And again, a lot of the time they are quite accommodating if you do that. And then also using a communication card or a lanyard or something as well, if needs be. In that downloadable document section that you've got the clicky link to, on the previous slide, that has the sensory profile and everything, we also have a communication card on there as well, an AUScot card, and that can be printed off. It's got like blank bits on it that you can fill in with any information that you like. So if it is that you need to put on it, you know, I don't do hugs or something, you can have that. If you think that being in these busy environments might mean you end up with situational mutism and you can't actually get those words out of your mouth, then you might want to explain that on the little card, you know, sort of letting people know that you're autistic, or that you've got different needs, can sometimes be really useful, especially if there's something that you're worried might come up and you might not be able to find the right words to explain it in the moment. Again, thinking ahead, filling in the card so that if you need it, you've got it there and ready, can be useful. And you've got like things like your sunflower lanyard that was developed by airports, and supermarkets also kind of subscribe to this, where if you're wearing one, it's to show that you or someone you're with has a hidden disability. That can maybe be quite a useful one to use as well. Not everybody likes them, not everybody uses them, totally fine, a very individual choice to be made. But yeah, you've got that option. And if you do want one and you don't have one, you can often go up to the service desk in places like Tesco or Sainsbury's or somewhere, and they will give you one, a sunflower lanyard, so that you've got a hold of one. So yes, and we liked this picture here on the left of the football between the adult and child, because I thought that was such a lovely representation of bonding with somebody without there being any physical contact between them whatsoever. So this is the thing, you can still show affection to people, you can still show that you love and appreciate the people in your life without ever having to touch them, if that is something that you need. Okay, moving on, and give me 2 seconds to have a little drink. So we're on to gift giving, presents and things like that. So for some autistic people, the best thing you can do for them is not wrapping any presents. And that might be because that unknown pile of things is going to be really anxiety inducing for them. Might be because they really don't enjoy wrapping paper and, you know, the ripping and things like that. So yeah, for some autistic people, wrapped presents, that's a big no-no. So yeah, if you've got someone in your life who's like that, or you are, instead you could maybe have things in a gift bag. Then you can just look in it and you can see immediately what's in there. You can just pull the thing out, or maybe in like a big kind of sack instead. You know, I know that some families, for their kids, their autistic kids, rather than wrapping individual presents, all the presents just go in like a big sack, and then they can sort of pull out as many of those presents as they like during the day, and look at them. There's no unwrapping involved. So yeah, that could be useful. Also, sometimes spacing them out a bit can be good, you know. Might be that instead of opening everything on Christmas Day, you want to have some of them on Christmas Eve and then some on Christmas Day. Might be that throughout the holidays you're kind of spacing out gifts and you're just having one a day or one every other couple of days. For people who are likely to be overwhelmed by a lot of new stuff at once, that can work really well, you know. And sometimes having them in a sack so that that person can go and pick what they want to take out, you know, one every day, can be really useful. So there are other options. Again, doesn't matter if everybody else is opening all their presents on one specific day. If that's not going to work for you or your family, you don't have to do it. There is no law saying you have to, I promise. Also, sometimes letting people know what they're getting ahead of time can be really, really helpful. For some autistic people, that anticipation, that unknown, can be really stressful, can be really dysregulating, can be really uncomfortable, and can actually ruin the gift itself, you know. So letting them know it doesn't have to be a surprise. If they're not going to enjoy it being a surprise, then what's the point, you know? The whole point is supposed to be that it's fun. And if that's not going to be fun for them, then why do it, you know? So if they want to know what they're getting ahead of time and they're getting distressed not knowing, just let them know, let them pick out their own presents if that's going to be more helpful for them. You know, again, it doesn't have to be a big surprise every time. Also consider either you yourself or your loved ones maybe opening presents away from other people. So again, can be a reason to do it spread out rather than all on one day, because for those autistic people who really, really struggle to have everybody watching them, whilst they're opening a gift. And it completely takes away from any joy of the gift because they're so focused on how they're reacting to it and whether or not they're displaying their gratitude and joy in the right way, and what everybody else is thinking of their reaction. You know, if that's going to be causing so much anxiety that it ruins it all, then it's okay. You don't actually need to watch everybody open their present because, you know, that's more for you. A gift is supposed to be for the person receiving it, right? And if what's happening is by giving them that gift and then expecting them to open it in front of you, you're distressing them, well, that's not really for them anymore, is it? That's for you. And that's not a gift, actually, is it? So it's all right. I know it can be disappointing as a parent. You want to see your child opening something and getting all excited about it. You know, you put in that thought and planning and money, getting them things they might like, you know, maybe as a grandparent or a family member or a friend even, you know, it's that like, but I put in all that effort trying to get you something you're going to love. I want to see the excitement of you opening it. But actually, if insisting on that is going to completely ruin that excitement, is it worth it? Probably not really. Also consider fragrance-free presents if scent is maybe going to be a problem. I know that, you know, the hand cream that I use is the unscented kind. You know, a lot of the sort of products and skincare stuff that I use is unscented because otherwise I'm constantly, oh, oh yeah, it's my hand cream. So yeah, if that might be something that's going to cause problems, sort of think about things like that as well, and think about if some of the presents are going to be kind of smelly or anything. I know one of my family members one year got a lavender scented present and almost sent them into meltdown, actually. So sort of thinking about things like that ahead of time can be useful too. And also think about the fact that special interest related gifts can really help with your regulation. So it can really help with your sensory regulation if you are struggling with some of that sensory input. Special interests are a brilliant tool for autistic people, really aid our mental health and our regulation, and everything. So yeah, please don't be worried if the person you're buying a gift for, if you think, oh, but other people their age wouldn't want something like this. You know, they're too old for Lego, or they're too old for, you know, this specific cartoon, or it's weird that they want XYZ. You know, it doesn't really matter, does it? Doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. If that's something they're going to enjoy, then that's good. And especially if it is going to help keep them regulated, you know, on the day. One year when I was what, about 12 or something, I think, maybe even a bit younger, 11. What I wanted for Christmas was a filing cabinet. Of course, all 11-year-olds like to have filing cabinets, right? How no one ever realized I was autistic, I don't know. But yeah, and my parents, to their credit, they got me it. I still have it to this day. It's over in the corner of this room. Really useful. And I'm not sure why I was so desperate for a filing cabinet, but I was. And instead of saying to me, don't be ridiculous, you're a child, you've got no use for a filing cabinet, my parents went along with it and got it for me, and I was thrilled. I was so pleased with my filing cabinet. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's not something that most people would get, if that present is normally something that people of a different age range would want. It doesn't matter. If that is something that's going to bring them joy, then actually, isn't it better that they're getting something they will enjoy than something you think they should like, but they're not going to get any enjoyment from, you know? So yeah, again, gifts are for the receiver. So think about what they're actually going to appreciate, you know, the stuff that they're actually asking you for, rather than trying to insist that really and truly what they should be having is XYZ. Okay. Also having to think about those decorations and the sort of visuals and some of the other sort of festive aspects as well that are around. Fairy lights don't need to be on 24/7 if that's going to be a problem. They can just come on for a short while. They don't need to be on every single setting or cycle as well. Or on the flip side, you don't need to just have your fairy lights up at Christmas. If you get lots of sensory joy from looking at those fairy lights, have them up all year. I do. in our dining room downstairs, we have a really extra long string of fairy lights that it goes back and forth across our ceiling, and that's the main lighting that we use. We don't use the main light. We put on the fairy lights most days instead, and I love it, and my kids love it, and it's a great kind of sensory room for that. So yeah, it's totally fine. Sometimes you might want to just keep those decorations to a minimum, or maybe only have them up for a short time as well. They don't have to be up from the beginning of November through to midway through January, you know. They can just be up for a few days over whatever kind of period you're going to be celebrating. That's okay. Or even just a day is fine. And maybe all you have is a tree and no other decorations, or all you have is a couple of hanging bits from ceilings, you know. Whatever's going to work for you, whatever's going to help you to feel regulated, that is all right. Don't be putting up masses of decorations because you just feel like that's what you should do, you know. And also you might want to think about keeping a bare wall in each room, so that if you are getting overwhelmed by everything, you've got a blank space you can focus on for a little while. Or you might want to keep some of the rooms of the house undecorated, so that if anyone is getting a bit overwhelmed, they can have that kind of that quieter space, that sort of visually quieter space that they can escape to and go into to become regulated again. Can be helpful potentially at this time of year to have a familiar Christmas playlist. I know that I do on Spotify. I pick and choose all the songs that I really like and then play that. So yeah, I don't just kind of listen to whatever's on the radio, because that might end up being a bit overwhelming for me. So yeah, sometimes sort of thinking about things like that can be useful. If your kind of temperature regulation is going to make it a bit difficult to have those big thick jumpers on that you're expected to wear, or yeah, kind of patterned Christmas jumpers or something, but you still really want to be participating, get loads of Christmas t-shirts. That's a good alternative instead. Or just a little pair of earrings instead with some snowflakes on or something like that. You know, you don't have to do what everybody else is doing. You can kind of pick and choose the degree to which you're doing the same things as everybody else, and you're kind of participating with this stuff. That is absolutely fine. Okay, also thinking about just in general, so you know, these ones are not particularly specific to this time of year. These are a lot of our usual normal sensory tips and strategies and supports that we would suggest, but in remembering them at this time of year can be particularly important. So use sensory supports. Honestly, do use them, and familiar sensory input at this time of year when there's a lot of change, a lot of different stuff. Getting back to some of the basics and getting back to some of those familiar lovely sensory inputs that really help to regulate you can be very, very useful. Do you need to have noise cancelling headphones or earplugs or ear defenders, you know, something to help you block out some of that noise that might be going on? That can be really, really helpful. Things like sunglasses can be good for all the bright lights and everything everywhere. Or maybe a hood. Hoodies are great, all right. I love this picture here where we've got someone wearing a hoodie and sunglasses, and they got their headphones. It's kind of showcasing quite a few of these. So yeah, hoodies can block out some of the light, they can block out some of the noise, they can create our own little safe space. They can sometimes be lovely soft fabric that we find really soothing. And a little nice tip here as well, putting a little dab of essential oil or perfume or something you like the smell of inside the hood or on the sleeve, for if you're having to go somewhere where maybe the smell isn't so good. That can be really useful as well. So hoodies can be brilliant. Hats as well, maybe hats with kind of brims that are cutting out some of the light, that can be useful. Or sometimes hats can kind of help with some deep pressure. Sometimes we just feel like we need to squash our own heads a bit and that can be quite useful as well. Remembering to get all your good fidgets and everything as well. So yeah, I've got some of mine here, my, you know, little kind of dinosaur puppet. I've got my stretchy one here. I had some of them in the office with me today actually, so I don't have all of them to hand, but all your normal kind of fidget tools or your stim toys, soft toys as well. So kind of having your favorite plushies and things that you can hug, you can squeeze, you can stroke. That can be really good. Sometimes having the heavy ones filled with sand can give you some good sort of deep pressure as well. Chew toys and things too, you know, the sort of necklaces and stuff that you can get, because actually chewing, good proprioceptive input there as well. Using that sensory profile that we went over to create a sensory diet, to figure out how you can get good sensory input that you like, how you can reduce some of that bad sensory input that's maybe going to be distressing for you. Thinking about that, implementing it in your life, really, really useful. Might want a big heavy rucksack or a weighted vest or a weighted blanket or something to get really good deep pressure. You know, sometimes, because I know that some of these things can cost a lot of money, but you might well have like a backpack somewhere and you might have a bunch of books. Put the books in the backpack, wear the backpack. You got some good deep pressure there, yeah? Got some good grounding weight on you. It can help us to sort of stop us feeling floaty. Sometimes we feel a bit kind of ungrounded and like we might just float off away. So having something with a bit of weight on you can be really useful for that as well. Movement as well, getting some movement. You get cool wobble cushions that you can sit on, like swing chairs and hammocks and things like that. Things like little trampoline type things too. So, you know, kind of getting all that movement. The pedals that I mentioned that I've got under my desk, you get like resistance bands that you can put round the chair, round chair legs, so that when you're sitting on the chair you can kind of push your feet against it or bounce against it and things like that. So getting some good movement in, even when you're having to sort of sit, can be really useful. Getting some good exercise that works for you. Not all exercise works for everyone, so make sure it's one that works for you and your needs, you know, whether that's yoga, Pilates, weight training, running, exercise classes, you know, swimming, anything at all. Think about what is going to work for you and your needs. And also maybe timers to remind you to eat, to drink, to go to the toilet, to see to all those interoceptive needs that we might sometimes forget about, not be processing. And having a buddy you can check in with, someone who might remind you about these things occasionally, you know, and you can maybe return the favor as well for them, so that they can kind of send you a message every day going, oh, so what did you have for lunch today? And you're like, oh, lunch, I forgot that was a thing, right? Yeah. That can be really useful as well, kind of enlisting the help of other people in our lives. All right, so lots and lots of good stuff there. Hopefully some of those tips and tricks are useful for you. But I did want to kind of mention as well, because, you know, I feel like sometimes we give the impression that all autistic people hate this time of year. And it's really not always the case. Actually, some of us do really love this time of year. Some of us do find it really hard, really hate it. Some of us love it. Some of us find it very cozy. Some of us really enjoy all of those different sort of sensory inputs and things, but we might still get dysregulated, even though we love it, even though we're excited about it, you know, we might still actually find it hard because it's still change. It's still different sensory stuff that we're not used to. So yeah, remember that and go easy on yourself. Don't blame yourself like, but it's so lovely and I've had such a lovely day, so why am I having a meltdown? Might be because you've had such a lovely day, actually. All those heightened, excited emotions, that can leave us dysregulated just as much as the really horrible, hard, you know, frustrating, upsetting emotions can. So yeah, be kind to yourself and remember to put into place these supports for you, for your loved ones, you know, whoever needs it, even if actually it's your favorite time of year and you love it to bits. And I picked this picture because I love this picture. This to me is lovely. So some of you might be going, oh no, but this is a lovely sensory input. I'm imagining smelling that tree, the fairy lights, the lovely glittery snow there. You know, maybe if I'm not out in the cold and the snow, but yeah, so I do tend to quite love this time of year, but still find it really quite stressful and dysregulating as well. The two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Okay, so a little summary quickly of what we've gone through today before we've got time for some questions. So autistic sensory differences are real, genuinely really real, and our sensory needs do change day to day and throughout our lifetimes. We don't filter that sensory input in the same way that other people do as well. So we might struggle when we've got lots and lots of different sensory inputs all at the one time. The festive season does tend to bring lots of sensory changes. There are also other contributing factors to the sensory difficulties that we might have at this kind of time of year as well. But the supports and strategies can be used, and they can be really, really good for helping us to stay regulated. And really, really key here, different people, different families can celebrate in different ways, and that is okay. It is absolutely fine if you are not doing the same as everyone else. You have my permission, okay? You really do. So it's fine, I promise you. Thank you so much for joining us, and for anybody who's watching the recording, thanks a lot, and that will be goodbye. And for everybody joining us here tonight, this will be time for questions now. Okay, if I could ask for that